Number 19 on our character strength, 24 in 24 is leadership for me. And I'm a little bit shocked that it's further down, considering I thought I'd be able to yap away about leadership. But thankfully, I have the help of my dear friend and peer, Lizzie Bentley-Bowers, who we have met before in Love of Learning. So number two and number 19. So we're seeing Lizzie at the two ends of my character strengths profile. And back then we spoke a lot about ADHD, particularly being both a blessing and a curse for when it comes to love of learning. And now I'm curious to hear about Lizzie's work with leaders. So hi, Lizzie. Thank you for coming back.
Pleasure, pleasure. I'd forgotten that you were doing this in order. I'd forgotten
Yeah.
that bit. So I'm already fascinated that this is quite, as you say, I mean, we've got to not get caught in the trap. We've all got all of them, right?
Yep, absolutely.
But how interesting that it's there's something going on for you that it's like, why is that so low down? And it's not how I would think of you either. I would think of this as right up there.
Really interesting, right? Especially because I think, as I've said, going further down, I've struggled to find A, people to talk to about my lesser strengths, and B, to be able to talk about my lesser strengths, full stop. But leadership, I am a little bit shocked myself. Maybe this was something, I mean, I did do the survey back in January when I wasn't in my leadership era, as the Gen Zs would say. And maybe things have changed since then, but I always thought of myself as being somewhat tapped in there a while back. But we'll tap into that shortly for the next, I guess, half an hour or so. Tell us a little bit about your work with leadership, Lizzie. What do you do and who with?
So I'm a leadership coach. I've been coaching for about 17 years now. Um, and I work with leaders in all kinds of organizations doing all sorts of things. Um, People talk about niche, don't they? I don't like that word very much.
Does anyone who's got ADHD stop
Yeah,
putting us in a box?
and I don't really subscribe to it. From it works for other people, it doesn't really work for me because leadership's about working with people. So that's what I do. I work with people. I work with people who want to think about their leadership, who want to be better leaders as they define it. I'm really interested in working with leaders who want to create better environments for the people that they lead. But I think that covers such a broad range of topics within that, of strengths, of things that we bring, of things we need to work on. It's so interesting because I've gone back to the definitions, the VIA definitions, as as you've said that about leadership. Because here it says, so I was thinking, how do we? I feel like I've forgotten what the definition of leadership is for VIA because I talk about the strengths in terms of all of these strengths being part of leadership.
Yeah.
And I'm working with leaders on, when are you in that strength? When do you need to dial up a bit more of that strength? And how might you do that? And all of that kind of interesting stuff. And I realized that when I talk about leadership as a strength, I think I'm talking about it as an umbrella term
Mm.
for all the strengths, which is why I'm surprised that it comes low for you. But then when you look at what it says, it's under justice, great. But when you look at it, it says organizes, I know there's more detail, but the headlines are organizes group activities and encourages a group to get things done. I bet that's not what you've been thinking of when you've been thinking leadership, right?
It's not, but that when you say that, I'm like, and the reason why I'm laughing is because that is me to a T.
Oh, there you go. So isn't that interesting? So on the one hand, I'm thinking, I absolutely see you as a leader in so
Mhm.
many ways. And for me, that's because I'm thinking about probably all these other strengths that I see and hear in you all the time. So then I'm thinking, oh, that's really interesting because the actual definition of leadership is, or the definition we're being offered here of leadership is quite a practical one. But
Mm.
you really sounds like you really recognize yourself in that.
I mean, for context, so I know Lizzie from our masters in applied psychology and positive psychology and coaching psychology. And do you remember when Nick, you know where this is going, right?
I do.
When one of our friends, Nick, at the end of the kind of we were graduating, she got us these beautiful little gifts, little bracelets, and every person was given kind of like a title, if you like, of who they were in our little community, like the motivator, the person who would just bring up the vibes all the time. And I got given the village chief, the one who brings people together and who organizes the online study room and so on. And I've kind of worn that title with honor and pride ever since she said it, because I have seen it in myself, but to be recognized as it was really validating. And I find, albeit it's exhausting, but if there's a gap and there's an initiative to be taken, I'm like, well, we can either sit here and complain about it, or we can fill the gap. So I guess I'll fill the gap. Who's on the journey with me? And that's the same thing with the reading club, for example, um, Brown Therapist Network, where I'm leading in that. Even recently, I was part of a theatre group. There's issues with payment, so I'm creating a little revolution of groups to be like, right, unionize. Let's get together. We've got to be able to think about ways to handle this, etc. Because I find this might sound a bit judgmental, but I wish more people took initiative. Help me de-judgmentalize that.
Everyone's doing their best with what they have.
Oh, that's another one of my mottos: do the best with what you have and the resources that you have. Maybe I need to remember that more often and when I'm leading others.
Well, I think there's so much that's interesting about that because it's that reminder that if you do choose to look at the strengths in terms of that analysis of them and print yourself off an order, that strengths coming lower isn't necessarily about not having them.
Yeah.
But for me, it might be about how much energy does it take to access them.
Mm.
You absolutely have that strength of leadership and you see it all the time. And my question then would be about, so what's the recovery that you need from that? Or what's the conditions that you need for that to make it feel a bit easier to lean into something that is something that you're proud of and that you add value through, but that perhaps it's appearing lower down, not because you don't have it, but because of what it takes for you to do it.
What a takeaway. And I really want to actually sit with that for a bit and remind the listeners, because I think this is the first time, every time, I think since I got to about strength number 17, I was like, yeah, lower, hard to talk about, lower, hard to talk about. And I keep reminding everyone, these aren't weaknesses, they are lesser used strengths. So I guess it's important to now ask the question instead, okay, they are a strength. They're just harder to access. So what would make it easier to access? What conditions would make it easier to access? What resources, what people might support you to access that?
What celebration of it might.
Yeah, and the recovery as well.
Recovery is huge. And I think if there's something about if you had written these in your order, it sounds like you might have put leadership quite high.
Yeah, probably.
So there's some that mismatch is there's some information in there.
Wow. It's ironic because my first question, I hadn't even, we haven't asked Lizzie a single question yet, by the way. But my first question was, what are some of the common challenges that leaders face in recognizing themselves as a leader? So we've worked backwards there. We've pretty much answered I guess for me anyway, the challenge in recognizing myself as a leader is understanding that it takes a lot it's there, but I need access, easy access to it, and create the conditions for it and the recovery. I think probably recovery is more important for me.
I think I know you talk to people about this a lot too. The back-to-back meeting was always around, and there's definitely a post-COVID pandemic escalation of that, I would say.
Mm.
So much work is online. So where the back-to-back meeting, you previously might have had that short walk from one meeting room to another to reset, to re-energize who do I need to be right now in this next meeting. You click it's literally the click of a button.
Yeah, that's so true.
And we might need to be calling on different strengths, dialing up different strengths, or recognizing, to your point about recovery, that we've just been using different strengths that take a bit more out of us in order to be who we need to be for the next one. But we just expect ourselves to just go, 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 go. And I think there's something really important in the recovery thing that doesn't necessarily have to be about, I think, and again, it won't surprise you to know that I can be an all or nothing thinker. And so one of the stories we can tell ourselves is, well, I can't spend the day at the spa, so I'll just keep doing. But recovery could be stand up and sit down again. Take a sip of water. It could be a really simple reset. I was talking recently about, and we've been talking about to-do lists, full disclosure, we've been talking about to-do lists before we came on this podcast. And one of the challenges I've heard recently is, well, how about a to-be list? How do you want to be? And what do you need in order to, and that's where the strengths I think are so useful. Who do you need to be? What do you need to be? What strengths do you need to bring in order to be how you want to be while you're doing that thing? And that's a whole different ball game then from, if what I've got to do right now is give this person this feedback, well, I might do a good job of it if I'm lucky. But if I'm thinking, who do I want to be? Who's the leader I want them to experience while I'm giving this feedback? Then we've got a different question. And that is not about shying away from difficult conversations, important conversations. It's not about shying away from clarity. It's not about shying away from expectation. But I really believe you can have both. You can have the clarity with things that come under some of these other strengths, like honesty, it's getting really clear, maybe some zest, maybe, but certainly some hope, some gratitude, some appreciation. It's, the strengths are a mix. We're not really, I don't think, ever in one at a time.
I love that. And I think you've just given us like 3 tools there to work with. Usually we're like, here's an intervention that you can go away with, but you've got 3 there already. To-be lists instead of / as well as to-do lists. Probably more important actually when you're going into a conversation.
Or
And
planning your day, or
yeah. So do you know what? I'm thinking about ways to make this tangible actually. And we were just talking about to-do lists and I showed you my little pink post-it note and my bullet journal. And really what I think I want to do, because when you were talking about recovery and going from meeting to meeting, there was at least a walking phase. It could be sit down, stand up as your recovery part. So again, to make that really accessible for people, what does that look like on a day-to-day basis? I guess what we want to think about is our transitions from meeting to meeting when we have a back-to-back. When you have that 30 seconds or or a 5-minute break, and you can literally just do a lap around your room, for example, do the lap around your room and think about, what do I want to be next? So while my to-do list right now will say 10:30 department meeting, really what I want to think about is, who do I want to be in this department meeting, rather than what things do I need to get off, because I think that also shapes the energy that you walk in with, especially if you have to have difficult conversations or mundane conversations. Even if it's mundane and it's like a tick box exercise, then who do I want to be? Maybe I'll bring the positive vibes. Maybe I'll bring a joke.
Yeah, it's a really old, it's one of the early TED Talks, a lady called Jill Bolt Taylor, and she talks about the experience of having had a stroke, and which fortunately she recovered from, but she was locked in, so she was cognizant of everything, but she couldn't move and she couldn't communicate. And later on and the talk's not about what I'm about to say. I think this she said in interviews later on, and she said it in her book, but she talked about how she knew what kind of care she was going to receive by the way that somebody walked into the room. And she said, the quote I think is, take responsibility for the energy that you bring.
Yes.
And that to-be list, that's what that's all about. We're talking about leadership, and there's an opportunity for leaders to say, this meeting finishes at 10 to the hour, because I know that we all need 10 minutes or 5 or whatever it is, but we all need 10 minutes to come down from this meeting and be who we need to be for the people that are going to encounter us next. And most, and I'm not going to suggest all, because I wouldn't dare do that. There's the all or nothing. But I really believe that most things we can do in an hour, we can do in 50 minutes or 55. And we can take a bit more responsibility as leaders for what we offer people as an opportunity to transition, to your point.
What a beautiful thing to do. I often, when I'm leading a session or a meeting, usually they're at the end of the day or just before lunch or just after lunch. And I'm a real stickler for time. So I'll start bang on the hour and I'll finish bang on the hour. But what I will be more mindful of is thinking about the beginnings and endings. And
Mm.
not just the beginnings and endings, but just the bit before that and just the bit after that. I mean, we used to do it in teaching all the time. If we ever have a lesson after lunch, for example, or what I'd love to see is head teachers who have the briefing early in the morning, that they finish the meeting and they expect you to go straight into registration and become the caretakers of 25 young people. So it's like, well, if there's any head teachers listening, what a beautiful thing to say that, you know what, we're going to finish this 5 minutes earlier so you can, and give it a purpose. Give that 5 minutes a purpose so you can lean into who you need to be for the rest of the day.
And there's a discipline attached to that too, as well, because the temptation, of course, in that 5 minutes is to squeeze out another email. And if
Yeah.
that's what you need to do to be what you need to be and who you need to be for the next thing, okay, great. But it's about being a bit more mindful of that and choosing that.
And I think you've already answered the next question as well, which was in your experience with all the leadership coaching that you've done, what's a common sub strength that people can help like that people can call upon to get access to their leadership?
Hmm. That's a tough question.
But I don't know if there would be a common. You kind of mentioned a few examples of different ones, but is there one that sticks out a lot?
Mm. Gosh, that's hard to answer because my eye is sort of skirting around them all and thinking, oh, if I were really pushed, I would say that the humanity, the line along humanity, love, kindness, and social intelligence. We've talked a little bit about feedback, and of course, that's only one of the things leaders do. But something that I've always been struck by is the fact that if somebody is offering me some feedback, if it comes from somebody that I love and respect, and I mean love in that broad sort of, affection, respect, all of that kind of, love,
Yeah.
love is a feature of leadership, I think. If it's coming from somebody that I love and respect, and I really trust that it's being offered with good intention for me and for the thing that we're trying to do together, great. And even if it's a bit painful or a bit difficult, I'm okay with it. Feedback from somebody who I don't feel that way about, interestingly, it might hurt, but I'm very unlikely to do anything with it. And I think one of the things that can get in the way for leaders is a thought that if I'm too close, then I can't say the tricky stuff. But actually, I think it's the love, the kindness, the social intelligence that makes it possible to say the tricky stuff. And Karen Ebert puts this beautifully in a different context. She's talking about storytelling, but she says personal doesn't have to mean private.
Mm.
So this isn't about everybody being everybody's closest friend. That's not what we're talking about. But we're saying bring the love, the kindness, the social intelligence, bring the humanity, and you're doing more to create the conditions to be brave, to be honest, to bring in some of those other strengths that we need to get that level of clarity. It's a woolly answer because I'm struggling to pick one. They're all we need
No,
them.
but I think what I'm hearing from that is maybe we focus less on what we bring to a person. Because when I asked the question, I was thinking about leader to employee, for example, right? A leader to another human. But actually, maybe we need to shift that energy from not leader to person, but leader to conditions.
Yeah,
And if
yeah.
we shift that energy and think a little bit more wider lens, a little bit more around that person, then ultimately we're also still empowering that person to be like, well, we've done the conditions part. Now it's up to you how you want to make space of these resources, how you want to make use of these resources.
I love that because there's the who do I want to be, And then there's who do I want to make it possible for these people to be? Simon Sinek, I don't know whether he's just posted it. I've recently seen it. He's posted a really beautiful example of somebody that he spoke to in a hotel. Who,
Yeah, I saw that on your Instagram this morning. Yeah.
oh, did you? Yeah, and he talks to this guy about, why do you love your job? And to put it briefly, what this man's reply is, I love it here because the managers engage with me, they talk to me, they tell me what I'm doing well. I've got another job over there and I just keep my head down and I try and get it done without making mistakes, and I get away again because the only interaction I have is critical.
Mm.
And that's what we're talking about, is how the difference between intentionally creating the conditions for people to flourish. And I'm not saying those managers who are not creating those conditions are necessarily aware that they're doing it, but that's what we're taking responsibility for: the energy, the conditions, the impact that we're having.
Tell us a little bit about the Strength Stacker journal, because you use strengths often and you work with leaderships often. I want to know more about the journal.
So it's interesting. One of the things a question that I think leaders find hard to answer often, in my experience, and I know I have found it hard to answer, is when someone says, "What are your strengths?"
Yeah.
And one of the places I've noticed this most often is when I've been working with sort of friends, family who've said, "Can you help me sort out a CV? Can you help me sort out an interview? Can you help me with a UCAS form?" Whatever it is. And I'll all this amazing stuff that I see and hear in them, I'm like, well, where's all of that? And people tend to find it quite difficult, I think, to know what their strengths are, to be able to then illustrate what their strengths are, to be able to say, this is how I know this is a strength of mine. And then the next step, to even be able to talk about them. So that's what I wanted to give people a bit more access to. So it started life as a sort of an interview preparation thing that I sometimes did with clients, where we talked about what are the experiences that bring this strength or skill that you have to life. And if they're struggling to access that, something that quite often gave us a way in was, well, what would other people have said about this if they were watching you, or if they were experiencing it? And then they were off, oh, well, they'd have said da 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 da. So I've turned that method that seemed to be really useful to people in preparing for interviews, because of the work that we then did on the MAPCP. I realized that this isn't actually just about interviews. This is about regular practice.
Mm.
So that when people say, what are your strengths, you're more likely to be able to answer the question. But also, to the kind of conversation we're having today, when you're thinking, who do I want to be? What do I need to lean into? You've got the evidence that you've done those things before. You've got ways of creating the conditions for yourself to lean into them, because you know them, and you know them in relation to yourself. So the stacking is about having them at your fingertips. You're not just hearing something once and letting it slide off, but anchoring it, knowing it, returning to it, making it part of who you are. It's where confidence comes from, and we confuse confidence with arrogance. They're very different things.
Mm. This is a great way, I think, to tackle. I mean, a lot of the time with my clients, especially those who are new in their positions, I hear a lot of imposter syndrome. So it sounds like this journal could be a great way to start tackling some of that and building it. Like you said, it's a habit or a practice that you build. Do you have a copy of the journal with you? Would you maybe just flash the cover?
Hold one up. The imposter syndrome thing's really, really interesting, actually. There we go.
And
Isn't
tell
it?
us, as you're talking about the imposter syndrome thing as well, let us know, like, how would one use that in their day to day, for example?
Well, so there's a school of thought I've read about recently, and I get it, that the imposter syndrome can be really useful because it's about learning, and it's about edge, and it's about stepping up. And great, I can absolutely see that. But people can also find imposter syndrome pretty debilitating, and it can mean that they are pretending to be something that they don't truly believe that they are.
Mm.
So this is about having the evidence and connecting to that evidence on a regular basis, so that when you are talking about yourself, or when you are being a leader, you're trusting yourself to be it. because the confidence comes from knowing that and repeatedly knowing it. There was I've got their permission to tell this story, but there's a client I worked with who said, I did what you said, Lizzie, and I told myself all the things that you said to tell myself, and I prepared myself by giving myself all these positive messages, but it didn't really work. And I said, well, how often did you do it? And what we uncovered was that they were doing it just before they needed to do the important thing. So of course, there's another voice in their brain then saying something along the lines of, well, you only say that when we're here, so I don't believe you. This is about being able to believe yourself when you need to be and trust in all the things that you actually are, but we don't necessarily do the work of believing in that and trusting in that.
And from our neurobiology, neuropsychology nerds out there, we know that building a habit can change the patterns of your brain, neurotransmitters, your hormones, etc. They will start also repeating the same message to your body. And you'll find that that actually does, when we say to, trauma survivors, for example, return to your body, when we say to anyone who's going through any mental health crises or issues generally day to day, returning to your body, like we just spoke about, stand up, sit down, transition. Returning to your body is a huge part of strength stacking. In strength stacking, our body's learning it as well. It's not just our minds, our body's saying, okay, I hear you. I'll make a note of that. And whether or not it makes a note of that so that it becomes memory, muscle memory, is based on how often you do it. So I think the journal could be a great thing to.
And sorry, I'm interrupting, so I'm getting excited about what you're saying. But that thing that you said about imposter syndrome, I think this is really important as well, because either culturally or by how we were raised or however we've had those messages, for many of us, the messages that confidence equates to some kind of unattractive quality, that confidence equates to arrogance or whatever that might be. And that's what I want this kind of conversation to change. Confidence is about feeling better. Confidence is about feeling more aligned, more alignment between what we know we bring and how we're presenting ourselves. My favorite quote, it's a Muhammad Ali quote. He said, "It's not bragging if you can back it up."
Oh my gosh, we use that in the I Am Remarkable workshops.
I
Based on
love it.
facts.
It's so great. And that's what the strengths work for me is all about. It's giving yourself the backup so that you can stand, sit, and I can literally, to your point about body, even just as I say that, I can feel in my body the difference when we sit or stand in what we know we bring. And that's what this is about, knowing it better. You always had it, but if you know it, you can be in it.
I think that's a beautiful moment to conclude this episode. Very short, but punchy and powerful. My gosh, I've walked over so many takeaways. If you know it, you can own it. And I think that's the really crucial thing. It just aligns with everything we've always said on this podcast. Your lesser strengths are exactly that. They're just lesser. That doesn't mean they're not existent. They are there. What access do we need to them? And you know me, I'm a little bit of a social justice crier, preacher, stand on my soapbox all I can, but I want to leave with the words that a friend of mine said yesterday when I was telling her about. I do sometimes get sometimes I often get imposter syndrome when I'm thinking about am I qualified enough to talk about this topic to these people? And she said, honestly, sometimes when you look at the leaders I've worked with, you need to walk into some rooms and have the audacity of a cisgendered, able-bodied white man because they get around the world with everything. So if you are a woman, if you're a member of the global majority, if you are differently abled, neurodivergent, it's time we started leaning into some of that audacity and understand that it takes building. So I'm really excited to use a strength stacker. I'm really excited to build on those strengths and take away whatever I've had with Lizzie in the last half an hour, that thinking about what I want to be. Thank you so much, Lizzie. This has been really,
Thanks,
really
Sam.
powerful. I really appreciate you.
Loved it. Likewise, likewise. Go well.